So, the dreaded Friday episode. Now, this is a little awkward for me because I'm completely off script. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If not, you might be aware that I cover a lot of history, a lot of religious history more aptly. However, I received a comment off the wife, so it struck home a little bit harder, that it sounds like I'm reading off a script. So, I decided to challenge myself. And I think there's going to be people questioning why I chose this methodology of approaching this. Mainly due to the fact that I'm talking about something that's rather taboo. However, for any Jehovah's Witnesses out there watching this, and I know there will be so, I've had 2 accounts of 2 people confirming to me that it's near on impossible for me to become an apostate. Now, let me preface this because this goes against a lot of what's out there. I was never baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. However, I was born as a 3rd generation Jehovah's Witness, and I followed the teachings up until my 16th birthday when I decided not to go anymore to the Kingdom Hall, that is. So, I'm gonna try to get into as much detail as possible. However, I'm also gonna preface yet again that this isn't an attack on the organisation or the denomination. This is purely my experience and what I took away from it and how it ultimately sculpted and shaped my worldview. I'm now nearly 30. I'm 32, which is near 30. So I'm nearly 30. And I've been out of that organisation for longer than I've been in it at this point. However, the challenges and the approach that I had to take seemed to be vastly different from a lot of other people leaving home. Now, I'd like to get into why I've chosen this topic, because I could have chosen any topic, but I felt more comfortable talking about something that I don't think that I can get wrong, which is how I perceived my childhood growing up within a cult. Now, that might have scared a lot of people. It might have thrown a major spanner into the works. However, this year, the UK government described the Jehovah's Witnesses as a cult. I'll play that little segment up here.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. He's making very important points about, particularly about the Jehovah's Witness cult. Jehovah's Witness cult. And one of the methods that they use to ensure that issues like this don't escape from the organisation itself is the act of disfellowship, where an individual is threatened by being disfellowshipped all communication with their own family. And I wonder if he'll go a little further into recognising that too. Thank you.
Sam Carling.
I absolutely will, and I very much thank the Honourable Member for that intervention. I'm very pleased that other Honourable Members in the House are aware of that issue. It's something I am trying to do some work on separately. I think it's not... It is certainly relevant to what I'm discussing here. Just to give the House a little more context on that, what that essentially means is if that organisation decides that someone has committed a serious sin, it can essentially tell all of their family and friends to cut them off permanently. The same applies if they just choose to leave the religion. But very rarely is that applied to perpetrators of crimes, and more often to victims that report them. And it is an enormous problem that has to be dealt with, and I look forward to engaging with the Honourable Member further on that.
So, with it being called a cult, I'm going to refer to it by that definition, and if you don't like it, then unfortunately you're on my channel, so I can do what I want. The aim is to be as selfish as possible and to improve my content, to be able to improve myself, to be a better content creator. So let's begin. Now we've got the major prefaces out of the way, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of backlash about some of the things, or maybe the video will just fall into obscurity and no one will ever see any of the video, and either way I'm happy either way, because this is a personal challenge rather than a bit to try to get a load of views. Now, let's define what is a Jehovah's Witness. When someone decides that they want to join this organisation, they are asked a series of questions, and upon answering affirmatively with the questions and getting the right answers, then one can request for baptism, and that involves them going to and I'm talking about what happened 16 years ago. I've not really been keeping up with it, but they would go to what is called a convention. You might have seen them in your cities. And these are conventions of thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses, and at them they end up getting fully submerged into water, and as they come out, they're a Jehovah's Witness. They've been baptized. I've not had that. However, I did aim to try to become an unbaptized publisher when I was younger. So now we know what the definition of a Jehovah's Witness is. Doesn't take away from anyone who wasn't baptized, because they was raised within this cult and had the indoctrination and the mindset imprinted on them through the wider influence that is the organization, the social taboos, the expectations, the thought processes. And I'm not here to attack the organization. I think people should be able to do whatever they want with their life. And I don't think someone who's within this group are stupid. I've been speaking to some Jehovah's Witnesses who are very educated, very interested in the doctrine and very interested in scripture and study, and it's taken me back a little bit because I were expecting everyone to go, oh, my opinion, that's on jw.org, and then tell me what their opinion is. And that is the case with some people, but I don't think that blanket statement applies to everyone. I'm not saying that these people would be considered spiritually strong, or I'm not defining any of that. That's not for me to judge. But my experience talking to people who have been baptized varies vastly. You know, there's different people with different intentions and different understandings. Some people can say, yes, this is the right answer, and they find hope and they can move on with their life with that little bit of information. Other people need to absolutely cannibalize every single question and come to their own truth. And your truth and my truth will look different. We're not all going to have the same outlook once we make our own minds up. And yeah, so I've been really struggling how to approach this topic. Now, I've tried to do it as tactfully as possible. I'm not here to attack anyone. I've said for the third time now. So let's go all the way back to when Jake, which is me, was a baby, was a child. How did the week look? So obviously I went to school and we had 3 meetings, which were the Tuesday, which was 2 hours on the evening, and we had a Thursday meeting, which was an hour long, and that was in someone's home, and the group size of that was maybe 15, 20 people. And then the Sunday was another 2 hours, and that was in the congregation. And then there was obviously the hour that was expected to go knocking on doors, which is field service, and they'd have little slips, and you'd have names and numbers on it. Not names, but you'd have numbers, house numbers on this little track. There was some that was like a DNC, which is like do not call. And I think they were like apostates, and we were all scared of them. So if you knocked on their door, I think Satan was behind the door. This was my mindset at the time, so I'm allowed to say what I want. So there was 6 hours a week, and on school holidays, I'd go out Wednesdays, sometimes, not all the time, but for an hour as well, knocking on doors, which was early morning. It's rather embarrassing knocking on your friends' doors that you go to school with. However, the mindset that was very different. I remember a time where I'd go into RE, which is religious education. I think they renamed it now to PSHCE, or it might have been changed even further. Maybe it's geographical within the UK of how that, how it's referenced. But I went in and said, none of this really matters because you're all going to die anyway. So I don't really need to listen to any of you because you'll die. Birds will come and eat all your flesh, and then I'll probably, help clean up your body. So if you want to go anywhere, let me know. I was a very cocky and a very flippant child. I still am, but a child that is. But so this didn't make me any friends. I was a social pariah. I didn't have many people who would want to talk to that weird kid who thinks everyone's going to die. And I tried preaching, it was kind of instilled that, your school's your territory, you know what I mean? I tried that, it didn't work. There was another person who was a Jehovah's Witness who was in the same class as me throughout most of my schooling, and they very underground. There was no move. It was, I'm Jehovah's Witness, but that was as much as it ever went. I was a bit of a weird kid. I still am kind of weird, so yeah, it's interesting due to the limitations as well. And what I mean by that is everyone had Christmas, everyone had a birthday, and I was the exception to that. However, my parents were very understanding of this, and they instead instilled us receiving presents at different times. So the present giving usually happened in October, which aligned roughly with their anniversary, their wedding anniversary. So we'd receive presents for that, and we'd receive presents throughout the year. So it's not like we were hard done by or we was neglected or anything like that. I had a very happy childhood, all things considered. It was very much instilled into us about lying, and that's something I take away in my adult life, that I despise lies. So trying to stay truthful, and I get people get things wrong, and it's not about getting things wrong, it's the intent behind the incorrection, right? If someone gets something wrong, and that's something else. So as I grew up and got older, I was given a choice. I was told that if I'm living there, I'd have to stay as a Jehovah's Witness. I'd have to attend meetings. That was changed, and I wasn't ever forced. My parents are a bit of an exception to the rule, from what I'm gathering based off some other testimonials I've seen. So I had it really easy comparatively. But so I was never thrown out on the streets. I was never... I do feel like this is why it held my father back from progressing. But I tried. I believed this up until probably the age of 15. And I carried on going because I had to until I was 16. And at that point, I decided this isn't for me. I'm going to take a break. I'm coming out of it. And I ended up going to do a foundation course in college, and I ended up staying at college for, I think, 4 years, and ended up doing what would be called culinary school. So a lot of them skills came with me in adulthood, and I still like food. I don't show you much lower than my shoulders, maybe my chest, but I'm a hefty boy. So, what made me decide that I don't want to do this anymore? What made me go, I'm not really feeling it. I don't think any of this is true. Now, I have a brother, and he also left the organisation. We're all still in contact, and no doubt he'll be watching this video. Hi. But I kind of had questions, and I never got satisfying answers from them. I ended up having a numerous of studies with elders, with ministerial servants, with just family friends, and my questions never got answered. And the further I dug, the more questions arose, and it kind of led into this angry atheist movement or moment for me, where I was convinced that there was no God. There isn't a God. You can't prove it. And I loved watching things like Matt Dillahunty and Richard Dawkins. I read all of his books. And then that's when the arguments started. Because I'd look at fallacious reasoning, and I would encourage everyone, if you want to question and grow as a person, I would look into fallacies, fallacious reasoning, and structures of how to have an official debate. And the reason I say that is because fallacies such as a very simple one would be crows are birds, crows are black, therefore all birds are black, right? The logic, you can kind of get there, but then it breaks apart at the end. There's a load of different straw man's probably the one you've most likely heard of if you're coming quite new to this, where someone misrepresents your argument and then destroys your argument so that they look like they won. A good way, a few I'd look into would be like steel manning. Try to argue the opposite of what you believe, or what the person that you're trying to argue or talk with, argue their position as faithfully as possible from their position, and get the go-ahead to see if you did a good job or not, just to understand if you are understanding their actual position. So, from this angry atheist mode, I was in that for a very long time, for probably 8-9 years. And it kind of made me want to rebuild. It made me want to go, everything's hopeless, and it doesn't mean that that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with saying I don't know. There's nothing wrong with saying I'm not sure. But the biggest problem that I had was with the word faith. I couldn't square it. I couldn't work it out. I couldn't rationalize faith until I realized that faith isn't meant to be rationalized. Faith is that feeling when you have that gut feeling about what's going to happen. Oh, I got a feeling this might happen. It doesn't mean that you're right. But it's just a hunch. And that's how I now view faith. Some people have a very strong dependence and a strong attachment to that faith. Unfortunately, that's not me. I never received that instillment within me because I came out of it, and that faith ended up getting exposed, and it ended up crashing all around me. And I was left in this world trying to face reality with a set of morals and guidelines that felt alien. And I looked at the world and I couldn't answer it. I was so isolated from alternative ideas that it was hard for me to ever accept anything after being, betrayed in such a way. So I took a step back and I thought, what happened What happened in history that's got everyone so fascinated and say, this is my faith, I have the faith of this, and I believe in Jesus Christ our Lord and Saviour. And I thought, well, let's look at it and just analyse it from a purely academic point of view, ignoring all the faith, ignoring all of the doctrinal arguments between denominations. Not that I don't like looking into them, I do like looking into them, but I tried to put all that aside and figure out the historical Jesus. And I think that's where a man called Bart Ehrman came in. Now, he is a self-proclaimed atheist who is a biblical scholar, and I cannibalized all of his work. From there, I moved on to Elaine Pagels and a few other quite notable scholars. And I ended up realizing that what the hell does it mean to be a Christian? Who gets to decide? What does Christianity mean? Who gets to say, I'm a Christian? Because if you ask a Catholic, is a Jehovah's Witness Christian? They'll say no, because they reject the Trinity. If you ask a Protestant, they'll most likely say the same. They disagree that Jehovah's Witnesses are Christians. And they most likely say the same about Mormons. But then if you ask a Jehovah's Witness, you get a different answer. And if you ask a Mormon, you get a different answer. And then I thought, this is a word that anyone can attribute. And I thought, well, what's the fundamentals behind it? And I came to the understanding that to be a Christian means that you accept, or you understand, or you follow the message of Jesus. So what did Jesus say? And whenever you look at anyone and you ask, what did Jesus say? What does Jesus preach? What does he teach? And you look at things like, go the extra mile, give them your outer cloak as well, and turn the other cheek. That's a big one. It kind of comes across as Jesus as this loving, kind-hearted person. And then you look at the other side, you actually read the thing, you see that he's flipping tables, he's chasing people around with whips, he's standing up against Rome. These few parables, I've made a video I will put on screen for you up here. And within them stories, shows an altered version. Jesus is subversive. Jesus is saying half of prophetic, prophecies. He's picking and choosing very carefully as to what he said in some verses. But ultimately, he spoke to the poor people, not the rich people, and tried to instill hope. He ended up dealing everything in parables so that it was understandable for those who was illiterate or didn't quite understand. And a lot of his parables made sense. It made you think. It made you stop and go, maybe if I applied that to my life, I don't think my life would get worse. And they seem simple. They seem like something that we take advantage of. And I think that's due to the fact that we're in such an information age right now that we've been instilled with a lot of information, especially with our education system here in the UK. It's not the best, but, there's always room for improvement, right? But comparative to a first century, early Israelite or in Rome, I'm pretty sure the average person here in the world is much more intellectually minded than this Israelite. Not that I'm downing on their history. Obviously, everyone has limitations, and there would have been some scholars that are way vastly, I think I'm talking mainly about a factor rather than a one person versus one person. I hope you're kind of keeping up with what I'm putting down here. So, the understanding and some of the powerful messages that when you stop and think about and you kind of analyze it, it doesn't seem like a bad thing. I can't really see anything where Jesus said anything horrible. And I think if everyone actually listened and looked at the words of Jesus, then the world would be a better place. So at that point, I realized, I think I'm a Christian. I accept the subversive nature of trying to make sure those who have control over you have as very little control over you as possible, trying to flip the table, trying to show how unjust the world is. And again, when we look at Jesus, I'm going to pull a different understanding than you. And the understanding is that it seems, from my perspective, and I'm allowed to have my own perspective, so from my perspective, Jesus is a good guy. He's not a bad guy. He's not saying go do these horrible things. There's some questionable things that you're like, you turn fathers against sons and sons against mothers. What? But the overall seems to be good. That's when I saw apocryphal work. And I thought, the Book of Thomas, what's this? Well, all it is a quotation book of what Jesus said. And I thought, well, I'm kind of accepting quite a few of things that Jesus is saying. Let's read it. And I read it, and I was like, again, there's some very questionable things, but a lot of it's quite sound advice. Not all of it, and I'm going to preface, not all of it. There's some weird stuff like turning women into men so that they can reach salvation. Not that I'm saying I'm against, the LGBTQ or anything like that, but purely in that position of changing them, why can't women just be accepted too? But again, it's a product of this era. And then I thought, did people actually believe some of these other apocryphal stuff? The Shepherd of Hermas, for example. And I started delving, digging, and I was like, people actually believed this. Christianity isn't just Jesus and then the church and then the, reformations that ended up happening and the schisms that happened in modern day since, Calvinism and the Protestant separation and the then splintering out into the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, things like that. It's a lot more divisive. It's a lot more nuanced. There's a collective group called the Gnostics, which I know a lot of people hate that term, but it's dualism. There are two gods. There are more than two gods. The bad God is of the Old Testament. The good God is the New Testament. And I was like, people actually believe this stuff. But they would have been considered Christians because they were following the words of Jesus. So at this point, I'm just like blown away by all of this insight and this knowledge that I never knew even existed. It just seems to be not mainstream. It seems to be that if you want to find this stuff, you've got to delve into some very deep, scholarly works and absorb as much as possible. And even then, especially to like a layman like myself, I don't get all the nuances. So I kind of lean on to a lot of their works to be able to reference what I'm saying. So moving back to being a Jehovah's Witness again, I feel like I've grown so much outside of the control and the environment of control that was instilled on me that I don't think I could ever go back to that. Now, let's say I want to go back. Well, they've had a lot of, changes themselves. They've had a beard. They're not allowed to wear beards, whereas that was forbidden. They never had like a hardcore rule, but you never saw someone up on the at the microphone with a beard. Forbidden. And if they did, you knew they were going to get having a talk to after. The generation teaching changed. They now have like an overlapping generation. And for anyone who doesn't know and you've made it this far with my ramble. They believe that Jesus came down invisibly in 1914, and this is predicted, I think this is all off memory, so if I get it wrong, I get it wrong. This is all predicted based off of when Babylon fell, which is 607, it's 589, but they think it's 6, so it's 607. So then we go from 607, and then we add 2,580, I think, I'm not too sure. And then we use math and like mush it together, and then that gets us to 1930. And then they got it wrong, so they changed to 1914. And they ended up having publications saying the end of the world's going to happen, but then they ultimately, their understanding was wrong, if you could believe it, but their understanding was wrong, so they changed that, and that was when Jesus came down to guide the organization. And this is just my understanding from when I was a child. So I might be fully wrong, and if I am, let me know in the comments. From there was meant to be an amount of 144,000. Now, when these 144,000 are all accounted for, then the end of the world will happen. But people who witnessed the events of 1914, well, millions today will never die. So that generation will live out throughout the last days and be able to witness Armageddon, which is the end of the world. Or perhaps the start of it. I'm not sure if they get all the way through or not. But so they said, well, what is a generation? And they changed the understanding of what a generation is, mainly due to the fact that most of these people were knocking on a bit. So they had to say, well, there's an overlapping now. So if you was born in 1993, or is it 1994, then they patched on another 100 years. And that was a big blow to me, because I was like, okay, so the world, we've got another 100 years. I could get into my 60s, 70s by this point. Whereas before, it was instilled that, and it's coming soon, anytime soon, you know what I mean? The book study, that was done away with. I used to love the book study. I didn't really like going to the meetings. I enjoyed the book study, mainly due to the cookies that was there, because the people's house, or the group that we was in, was not a very poor area, it was quite an affluent area, so we got really nice, like, you know, Rin Tins. If you know the Rin Tins biscuits, we got Rin Tins, and we got like them, I've got some here, hold up. Some of these Tunox. Oh, so anyway, I'm kind of just rambling at this point. So, not just that, I felt like my questions were being listened to. I could ask the questions. It was less, rigid. It was more free, and I enjoyed them until they got done away with. So, even if I wanted to go back, I couldn't. And the whole idea now of this tele-evangelizing stuff with the governing body members on the big screen, and you got to watch your weekly update or something like that. Even if I wanted to go back, I couldn't. Because the organization that existed when I was in it has fundamentally changed. It's completely different to how I remember it. So I can't ever go back to that. And yeah, it's like a bit of sweetness, mainly due to the fact that because of the changes, it almost, for me personally, cements that this is a man-made organization in my mind. So it allowed me to be able to move on, I feel. And yeah, so it's one of those. It's one of those where, we can all look back at the organization after being out for so long and see that it's vastly different. However, I know people that have been in and are still in and would still consider it the same organization. Now, I don't know if that's anything to do with slowly boiling a frog, or if that's just due to the fact that the organization changed to fit modern times. However you want to answer that yourself, then go for it. we're all entitled to our own opinions, and this is mine. So, I'm obsessed mainly due to the fact that I found the foundations of my worldview was flawed. And I found the string and I pulled and everything fell apart and everything needed to be rebuilt. And through that, I delved into history. Some might call an unhealthy obsession with religion and religious history. I enjoy it. It's a hobby of mine. So with that, I look at what did people believe in the past? What did they actually believe? What messages and what doctrines and what understandings have changed in the ancient world? So I cover stories, parables, the nuances of certain questions within the ancient world. I look at the Second Temple. I look at everything, mythology, religion, and see what people actually believed. So, if you'd also like to see what people used to believe, then hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and depending on how this video goes, we'll either be having a lot more of these open chats or we'll be having a lot less. I definitely feel like it's helped me grow doing this, and it's helped me, I feel, come out of my shell a little bit more instead of reading off a script all the time. So, thank you very much for getting this far. Take care.